Alright, today we're going to be tying up a articulated half and half fly, so it's kind of like an articulated deceiver, but it's got some dumbbell eyes. Got a little footage of some fishing I did with my kind of prototype of this fly. I ended up catching a black crappie or a sac-a-lait right here, and then before this I didn't have the camera going, but I caught a chain pickerel. So check out these fish and then we'll get started tying the fly. Thanks for watching. Alright, we're tying up a articulated half and half, so it's kind of like a Lafkas-style deceiver, but with some lead eyes, making it a half clouser, half deceiver, but we're gonna do a little articulated tail, kind of like the Lafkas-style modern deceiver. So I'm gonna start with a 3/4 inch fish shank. Turn this around. Want the side that I can actually tie into the hook, the bigger loop is going to attach to the hook. So I'm going to put this smaller little loop in the vise here. I'm using Vivas GSP 200, but 150 would work fine, or any other decently strong thread. Not too worried about building up any bulk, but do want to get a good tight grip on this. Cover up the hook, the shank, kind of seal down that opening. Cut the thread. This tail is just going to be kind of like the back end of a deceiver, so a couple saddle hackles in white. These are kind of small, so I'm just going to find a couple of the nicer ones. Right, so I just plucked a few random ones, kind of trying to line them up. Not really making this a pretty fly, just gonna kind of do it wabi-sabi style. Once it gets wet, it doesn't really stay pretty all matched up looking anyway, so just trying to line them the same length. See, I got 4 of them. Put them down on top of the shank, fold them, do some pinch wraps, a couple loose ones and a tight one. Get them tied down good. Go forward a little bit with the thread, clip off the butts. Alright, cover up those butts. I'm going to tie in some flash. I've got some holographic Flashaboo. Any kind of crystal Flashaboo will work. Just take a few strands. Take them, I'm going to tie in at the midpoint, go back a little bit on one side, and take my other side, pull it around. So I've got them kind of divided roughly half on each side of those saddle hackles on the tail. And trim them right a little bit longer than the tail. Alright, and then to finish this little tail piece off, we're going to take a piece of white schlappen. And I'm just going to palmer a little, kind of a soft hackle collar in front of those saddle hackles, and then we'll be done with this back part. Got a nice webby schlappen feather here, strip down, kind of create a little gap there, and then tie in right at that gap, wrap forward to lock in the feather. Oops. Trim off the extra. I'm just going to palmer this forward. Try and keep everything going the right way. And tie it off. I'm going to wrap back over these first few anyway, so I'm not super worried that some of them are not perfectly tied in, but clip the stem here. Push back those non-cooperators, tie it back over the front. That pushes everything back a little bit. Then do a dab of super glue on there and do a whip finish. Seat it good and cut the thread. And that's our tail. Alright, for the main body, we're going to use Gamakatsu B10S. This is a size 1. Alright, so I'm going to lay down some thread towards the front. This is, like I said, a half and half style, so we are going to use dumbbell eyes. So I like to put down a bed of thread for the eyes to kind of grab to a little bit instead of just the slippery metal of the hook. So go down, cover up the little spot around where the eyes are going to be. I'm using some medium eyes. You could use large, extra large, or small, depending on the water you're going to be fishing, how quick you want this thing to get down. I think this medium is kind of, well, I would say a medium sink rate. Since this fly is bucktail and a lot of natural materials, it will sink pretty good. It's not going to hold a ton of water. So I'm going to tie these, kind of measure with the eyes to the front of the hook. So about one set of eyes back. Do some figure eights. And this is going to ride hook point up, so the eyes are going on the top. That's another reason why I kind of like using the shank on the back instead of another hook back there. This riding hook point up, I feel like it's just kind of a lot to have 2 hook points riding up. There's just more to go wrong. I think this kind of keeps it a little more snag free, which is the whole point of having the hook point up anyway. So now I'm going to do some wraps under the barbells, then some wraps around the base of those wraps to really lock everything in. Pull tight every few turns around. And then that should be good. Now we're going to go
back to the bend and do our articulation. I like to go just a little bit past where these B10Ss start to bend, just to prevent, I mean, they can't really foul on this one since there's not another hook, but it can kind of get wrapped up in the gap of the hook. So wrap that down, then wrap back over. Put down a bed of super glue on those wraps, and I'm just going to use 40-pound mono and no bead on this articulation. That seems to be stiff enough to not really foul, and doesn't really, not doing a long articulation, so we don't really need a a set of beads to extend the length at all. So just take a piece of 40-pound monofilament, kind of start it behind the eyes. I like to get just some kind of positioning wraps to hold it along the top of the hook. I'm not really applying too much pressure because that would pull it away from me, but just kind of get a good set of wraps that holds it on top of the hook, and then kind of gradually apply more pressure with some sets of wraps back and forth all the way back to the start of the articulation there, and then I go a little bit ahead of the barb just to make it easier to tie this back piece on. So got our tail, like I said, not a super long articulation. We want the two parts of this fly to kind of marry together seamlessly, so just gonna get a little bit of a gap there for it to swing around, and then tie this on the bottom side of the hook as best as possible. Again, I kind of start a little loose so that it can kind of hold itself in place before I really start pulling hard on it. And with the super glue and enough wraps, I don't think this is ever going to pull out, at least not before your tippet breaks, and there's no hook on this one anyway, so it's not like it's going to get pulled out by a fish. In there good, and then do some tighter wraps to finish it up. Alright, so as you can see, that can swing around pretty good, not too far back. So the body on this one, we're going to do a complex twist. So we're going to take a couple colors of schlappen. I've got white and olive, and then also some Palmer chenille, and we're gonna tie all three of these in at once, and then using the loon dubbing spinner with this gator attachment, we're just gonna grab all those, spin them up, kind of making a brush, and then Palmer that up to make a nice body with a lot of movement, some color variation, and some flash. And then we'll tie in our bucktail at the front, and that's pretty much it. So for the schlappen, kind of want a piece with long enough fibers that it's gonna, we want to cover this articulation. So got a nice nice schlappen here with some pretty long webby fibers on it, and I'm gonna get an olive one around that same length so that they're matched up good. Let's see here, another nice one. Same as on that back section, kind of make yourself a gap to tie in. Tie it in back there, right on the gap, and then wrap forward a little bit. You don't have to be super particular about the way these feathers are hanging and all that kind of stuff like you would on like a smaller soft tackle where you want the feather to be concave out and whatnot. We're gonna spin this up and it's gonna get brushed back, so just need to be sure it's tied in securely. Do the same thing with the white. Try and match up the length of the barbs as best you can. Those schlappen tied in. Next is going to be the Palmer chenille. I'm going to actually use the medium size. It's got a little bit longer pieces of flash on it, kind of match the length of these barbs on this schlappen I'm using. You can see that. So also the rope in the middle of this helps to strengthen the stems of the schlappen, so when you get it all twisted together, it's like a nice rope. I think Cheech with Fly Fish Food came up with this complex twist method. They were using, or will tend to use this polar chenille, but I don't know. I like the polar chenille has a much thicker kind of rope. So depending on if you want, I like to get a lot of close turns and really wrap this whole brush around a bunch of times and touching wraps. If you wanted to maybe make it a little less dense, I guess this thicker rope in the middle would kind of build in some gaps between each wrap, but I've kind of liked the way that the Palmer chenille with its thinner core works for me, but no right or wrong way, it's just the way I like to do it. So tie that in tight and then go forward. And we are going to leave ourselves a little bit of space behind the eyes to tie in some bucktail, and I put a little red throat on it, so leave my thread hanging there. Again, I'm going to grab all three, both schlappens and the chenille with this clip, and you can kind of try and align the barbs and the feathers as much as you can, but basically going to spin it and brush it out as we spin it. So got them all, do a few spins, and then for a brush I just have this chopstick that I glued some Velcro pieces on, so cheap little DIY dubbing brush, and just kind of brush it out, untrap any fibers that might have got trapped in that initial spin. We're going to brush it out again once we get it all wrapped on the hook as well, but this kind of helps to get them all moving the same way. And maybe one or more spin there, another brush, and then we can palmer it on. If you have a rotary, it kind of helps just to kind of make a few turns at a time, but preen everything back a little bit just to avoid trapping some of those fibers. Make a first couple turns, bring it back, tighten it, just kind of repeat that process going forward. It looks like a mess, but it actually cooperates pretty good once you get it on there and then brush it out. One more turn here. Tie it off behind the eye. 3 turns, tight pull, and then just kind of get in there with your scissors and try and snip as close as you can to the hook. Cut that out. Then I like to sweep everything back and then just make a couple more turns to lock everything in before I really go heavy with that brush to kind of brush them out. That locked in. Brush, just kind of go every which way. You can see it makes a nice kind of variegated, like mixes up the colors well, and then you still have the flash underneath and kind of all mixed in. So it adds some bulk, but it slims down in the water. A ton of movement. Really cool little trick, and it's, like I said, you don't have to buy brushes. You kind of make your own. You can mix whatever colors you want. You can mix different colors of flash, different colors of schloppen. And that's nice flowing into our articulation nicely there. All right. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add just a little bit of a red throat on the bottom, kind of deceiver style. I'm just gonna grab, you could use some red flash, crystal flash. I'm using a little red laser dub here. Just kind of an accent, homage to the original deceiver. Kind of get these fibers aligned. I'm in at their midpoint, right behind those eyes. Tight wraps and wrap back over them a little bit just to lock them in. Good to go. And you can kind of brush out those as well to get any ones that were a little loose. All right. I'm actually going to take a little bit more and do a little dubbing noodle to cover up some of these wraps right behind the eye here before we put our bucktail on. All right, looking good. Okay, bucktail. So again, this is the bottom, so we're gonna do white, white, white on the top and the bottom, and then one extra piece of olive over the top to kind of give it a darker back. So just standard white bucktail. Pretty good clump there. Go ahead and grab it by the longer ones and pull out any of the shorter fibers. Really helps with the movement. The longer fibers really move a lot when they get wet. So I'm going to make this go right a little bit longer than our main body to kind of blend in with this back piece. So right about that. Take my thread to the front of the eyes. Couple loose wraps just to kind of get everything going the right way. Set them a little bit on top of the hook, kind of pull down. And then we're gonna go under the eyes and then over the back to kind of just, and really keep them close to the eyes. You don't want to wrap back, but just a couple wraps to kind of hold them going over that, over those eyes, and then back and front. Cut off these ends. Wrap over those. All right, now the top. Again, we're going to do a layer of white and then a layer of olive. Do a little bit more on the top than the bottom, just to kind of, the more materials you have on the top, the more it'll want to float the right way, hook point up in this case. So just a tip for any fly, the more materials you have on one side or the other, it's going to tend to float with on the side with the most material. So again, strip out our shorter ones. Looks good. And then we can go kind of back into our back section there, a little longer than our main body. Again, a couple looser wraps just to kind of get everything like you want it. And then you can kind of pull down, flares them out a little bit, wrap back, tight, and then trim. Cover up those trimmed ends. We're going to build a little bit of a thread head on this so you don't have to worry about being super economical with the wraps. Just get it tied in good. All right. And last, some olive bucktail. Same length as that white. And then you kind of check. These tend to kind of rotate around, but just tighten a little bit. Try and push them a little bit around so they're not sitting just straight on top, but just kind of wrapping around just a little bit. Pull tight. More tight wraps before we trim, just to make sure it's locked in. And then we're just gonna cover it real good. Build up a nice little head there, and then again, I like to put a little dab of super glue just to lock everything in. And I'm going to color this white thread. Well, I was going to put a little red nose, but we got that throat, so I'm just going to leave it white. But you could add any kind of color you want, black, olive, if you got whatever kind of marker. If you want to kind of make it match the rest, up to you, but I'm going to leave this one white. Put a whip finish on there over that glue. Turn it off, and that's it. So, kind of just a little take on a half and half. Like I said, this articulation really, you know, saddle hackle tail is going to move, but this just gives it even more freedom, and you know, kind of fun to tie. We're going to use it on bass. I've caught some chain pickerel and a crappie on a kind of the first version I tied. I actually had two articulations, but it got a little bit kind of long and snaky looking, so I like this one where I just have the one articulation. Yeah, try one out. Have some fun out on the water. Thanks for watching.